Real quick, let me just give you a couple minutes on Bluespring and who we are. We're based here in Cincinnati, Ohio. We've been around for about 13 years. Our whole focus as an organization is a software and solutions provider around analytics and automation. Everything that we do is built around the Microsoft platform, so we take advantage of Visio and .NET and SQL Server and Windows 2000, etc. And if you look at our product portfolio and the services that we provide, we assist, if you look at the top of this slide, everything from an analysis and improvement opportunities. So we have two products in our analytics portfolio. The one that we're going to be showing you today is ProcessView. But we have a product called LeanView, which is for value stream mapping. Those are both Visio add-ins, and that allows us to provide a solution to organizations to help them really assess and understand what's going on today, and then model improvement opportunities to identify, if we do these things, what is it going to mean to the organization? What benefit are we going to have? And it allows companies to quickly get a return on investment and show a true return on investment that if we do these things, we're going to go from needing 15 people to do this specific function within a process to 12, and we can reallocate those resources or what have you. And we also have, from an automation standpoint, a product called Bluespring BPM that can help enable those improvements by implementing automation. So that's our whole core focus. We've, like I said, been around for 13 years. That is all we do every day, all day, is look to improve our software and our solutions. We've got a training arm. We have a services arm to help organizations with implementations and with what we call assessments, rapid process assessments, to help them quickly get a return on investment in their asset, whether it's LeanView, ProcessView, or our Bluespring BPM solution.
The ProcessView tool we're going to review today is an add-in to Microsoft Visio. Let me see if I can move my GoToMeeting so you can get a full view of my screen here. In terms of ProcessView, the first thing I would point out is that when you start working with your Visio diagrams, the tool does allow us a great deal of flexibility in terms of the kinds of Visio templates and shape stencils that we can use to compose our process flowchart. So when ProcessView is looking at any Visio diagram, it's not particular about the kind of shapes that you've used to compose your picture. Really, the only area of concern is that the connections between these shapes are firm. Because what ProcessView does is going to look at this page, and it's going to determine where are my starting points, where are my ending points, which of these shapes on the page are activities. And the reason that's important is what we're trying to do with ProcessView is to transform this flat drawing into a process model that we can use to make some predictions about how long it's going to take, how much work will be involved, how much it's going to cost to get an item through our process. So in order to do this, we are obviously going to have to get some data into these shapes. And so as I try to determine the kinds of data I want to put into the shapes, I need to know, is it a starting point, is it an activity, or is it an end point? Because there are special pieces of information that we're going to want to describe for these shape types. So when I'm at the front of the process, I might want to know things about the demands, right? So how many items do I have to push through my process? Versus your activities where you're going to be focused more on, how long does it take to do this step? What's the work involved? Who's responsible, etc. So that's the first thing ProcessView is going to do for us. When we begin with a flat drawing, we want to first select some basic, what we call shape data attributes or shape data fields where we can store information about performance. So when you have your Visio drawing complete, you use this ProcessView add update attributes function. And within this dialog, we have a number of shape data fields or attributes to select from. But before we select data, you can see it scanning the map to make sure that there aren't any problems in how it will determine where do we start, which are activities, which are the ends. So if it finds problems in our existing drawing, it gives us the opportunity to review these. So in this simple example, we just have one mistake. How fortuitous, right? So as you select that message, it will actually highlight the problem area in your drawing. So with this ability to scan a picture or a flow chart that's in Visio, identify where there are any disconnections, and then quickly make repairs, allows us to leverage existing drawings, right? So you don't necessarily have to start with a blank page. If you have existing Visio maps, the first step is the same. Get the drawing together, hit Add Update Attributes. ProcessView will give you instructions as to how to make repairs if there are any structural issues with that drawing. But if we're happy with the structure of the map, what is presented is an opportunity to select from a list of shape data pieces or shape data attributes. And again, it's giving these to us by shape type. So I've got activities, I have connectors between my shapes, I have end points, I have start points, etc. So for each shape type, we pre-select a number of attributes that would be, available to you by default. You kind of get them whether you want them or not. But then we have a number of additional attributes that help you describe things about the process steps. And while we think this is a well-thought-out list, you are not confined to these attributes alone. So if you have a desire to capture information about things like distance walked, or what department is responsible for an activity and things of that nature, we do also let you incorporate custom properties. So once we've drawn the picture, we go through this dialog, we quickly select any additional attributes we might want to incorporate, and we hit that Add Update button. So what that's going to do is it's going to add the data fields that we've selected from the list into the start shape, the activity shape, and our end nodes, right? So if we step through those, you can see for the process as a whole, we want to know things about, how long is the work week, right? Or am I doing a standard, 40-hour work week? Is it maybe 2 shifts? Is it maybe 7 days a week, etc.? So you'll describe some high-level information of that type for the process as a whole. The minimum pieces of data that you would have to define would be inside the start shape. You want to talk about an arrival rate. So, again, this is how we describe demand. So how many emails are coming into my little customer service process, or how many phone calls in some period of time, right? At each of the activities, I want to talk about things like how long does it take, right? And how much work is involved, and who's responsible for that work. And as we step through and add this data, we're talking about how long does it take when I perform this activity, or when I get to this point in my process. Another important piece of information we want to understand is how often do I get there, right? So when you encounter decisions like the one you have on the screen here, ProcessView is going to ask you at these connectors leaving these decisions, how often is it yes or no, left or right, A, B, C, or D? All right, so now ProcessView not only knows how long does it take and how much work is involved when I visit this activity, but ProcessView can use these probabilities to start to understand how often do I get there. Okay? So if I just switch to the next page, this is where I've already defined some data inside the shape. And so we said for our simple customer service example, I've got about 45 emails and maybe 9 phone calls or something pouring in the course of the day. Now, once I described that demand, I talked about in our activities, we talk about how long does it take, how much work is involved. What's important to note about ProcessView is you actually have 3 options in terms of how you can describe time or quantity-based attributes. So if it always takes 10 minutes and it's relatively constant, then I can tell ProcessView it takes 10 minutes. If, however, there's going to be a range, as there often is, you ask somebody how long it takes, they say, it depends. Is it a good day or a bad day? Do I have a new person working this, or is it a seasoned expert, right? So we've got variability in these time and quantity attributes. And so I can describe a range of values to ProcessView format. Additionally, I have my third option is what we call an estimate, where I just tell ProcessView most of the time I expect it to be 1, but it vary between 1 and 3. And so it's a little different than some of the other tools you might have worked with in the past when you capture this data, because you have those 3 options. So it's how long does it take? Is it a constant value? Will it range between some minimum and maximum? And if it's a really big range, we can talk about what is it most of the time. But once you've defined at least one arrival rate at a start node, and you have described at least one time value and an activity in the map, you can start generating reports with the ProcessView tool. Now, obviously, the more data you incorporate in your model, the more robust those reports will be. So as I incorporate information about cost, I will begin to see cost metrics appear in the report. If I describe custom properties to capture things like distance traveled, or I mentioned department earlier, then I could start to see additional worksheets to highlight that information. So minimum requirements is just one arrival rate at a start node and at least one duration, one time value at an activity. We would obviously recommend that you also go through and capture these probabilities. But once you've got those basic elements, there's actually quite a bit of information available to you regarding the performance of the process. And so underneath the Reports button on the ProcessView ribbon, you'll see there are actually, what do we have here? I guess 6 options. And so this summary analysis report is what we'll discuss first. This is available to all ProcessView users, gives us a quick snapshot of performance, and then a Pareto analysis of the time and cost metrics for each of the activities in the flow. Your process analysis report will give you that information. Additionally, you'll start to see information grouped by resource. Right, so I want to understand how much time is the operator responsible for versus an auditor, right? Or I want to know about custom properties. What is the average distance traveled? Or how much time falls into my accounting department versus the quality department? We've got a question and answer report that you can use if you select specific questions in our attributes wizard when you're configuring your map. We will develop answer worksheets to address each of those. And then the ability to compare reports and to push information to PowerPoint. And, Rich mentioned this is what we do every day. We build and use and apply our analytic tools. So we do have a number of customers who request custom reports. And so if you were one of those customers, you would have this additional option. But if we just step through the basic reports you get from ProcessView, our summary analysis report is probably the most concise. And this is the report I would typically review first after I've drafted my model and I put in that preliminary data. And so the map profile you see here is designed to answer those fundamental questions. So I know it's about 75 minutes of work. In terms of the elapsed time to get through the process, how long does it take? It takes about 400 minutes. And the cost associated with getting an item through my process, about $33. Additionally, it's reiterating some things like I happen to have 54 items coming into this process each day for processing. Right, it talks to me about utilization. This is a metric that ProcessView uses to communicate how capable the process is of meeting the demand upon it. The utilization is how ProcessView compares the pace of arriving items to our throughput capability. So if it takes 75 minutes worth of work, right, to do this process, and I have items arriving every 54 per day, and this helps me understand, can I meet that demand? Can I accomplish these 54 a day? And if I do, how busy are my activities going to be? So this tells me the bottleneck in this process happens to be busy about 2/3 of the time, okay? Now, we get some additional information about how many ways can I start, how many ways do you get out of this process, how many activities are in the middle, et cetera. And then it reiterates some information that you provided in the page properties about how long is my work week, et cetera. So once you understand how much work is involved, how long does it take, and how much does it cost, This is all at the process level. If you want to drill down and get detailed information about the activities that make up that process, that's what these remaining worksheets are designed to do. So if my interest is in how long it takes to get through the process, and I'm trying to understand where does this 400 minutes come from, if you review the graph and the tabular data, what ProcessView is doing is it's lining all of my activities up in the largest to smallest contributors view. So it's telling me of that 400 minutes, the bulk of that is driven by this wait for a response activity in the map. That happens to account for 72% of the elapsed time in my model. So if I was trying to reduce the overall lead time or flow time to get through this map, I would want to understand how do I either reduce the amount of time I spend waiting for a response, or how do I find a way to get there less often, right? Because, again, ProcessView is taking in not just how long does it take when I do this activity, but how often I get there. And so if the concern is maybe not that overall elapsed time, but I'm more focused on the work involved to get through the process, then I would come to my process time worksheet. And, again, it's telling me of this 75 minutes, the largest contributor happens to be at my research activity. So for all the activities in the process, when I look at how long they take and how often I get there, this would draw my attention to research. Okay? Happens to account for 25%. So secondarily, I want to look at this decision where I'm determining if I have an immediate solution, because that accounts for some 20% of my total. So this is how ProcessView really helps us understand not just how are we performing today, but if I want to make improvements, where do I need to focus my attention? And we're looking at a simple example today. We've got about 10 activities or something of that order. But in the real world, these process maps can get very complex very quickly, and so it can be difficult to understand where you need to start working first to look for improvement. And so your duration, your process time, your cost worksheet all tell us that process level metric, but then help us understand how the individual activities that make up that process contribute to that. Helps us understand where we need to focus improvement actions, so we make sure that we're investing in improvements that will give us the biggest bang for our buck, if you will. And then utilization, I mentioned, is how ProcessView looks at how busy our activities will be. So I said the bottleneck is 68%. You're probably wondering, well, which one's the bottleneck? And it's just that first one in the list. It is the busiest activity closest to the front of the process, and in this example happens to be that research activity. So ProcessView says, okay, it takes me an hour to do research. I do one at a time. It looks like I have 3 researchers available to do that work. I effectively process one item every 20 minutes at this research activity. Says, but the demand, I've got 54 a day, 30% make it to this step, so I'm going to get demand to do this every 30 minutes, right? So if I just compare the fact that I can effectively process these in 20 minutes, demand for this is every 30 minutes, it says, I'm going to be busy about 2/3 of the time, right? So this is a very useful metric because often this can be a validation metric, right? If I see utilization values over 100%, unless there's a backlog in the real world, I know that I've misrepresented something. And so that will then trigger me to go back and review the inputs to my model, right? As soon as utilization goes over 100%, that says work arrives faster than I could possibly process it. So either it doesn't take that much work, or I can do more than one at a time, or I don't get there as often as I thought, right? But again, this utilization metric is really just for us to validate that we've constructed an appropriate model, that we've got an accurate representation of the real world. And so this is all very good information, right? How long does it take? How much work is involved? How much does it cost? Where do I want to focus my improvement actions? But in addition to this information, the process analysis report, which was the second one in that list I showed you earlier, helps me see similar information, just arranged slightly different ways. So I still have this map profile that tells me at the process level, here's how long and how much work and how much it costs. But you can see now you're starting to see things like user properties, right? So these would be any custom properties that you incorporate in the model. So if you want to see information about custom properties, about resources, maybe you built classifications because you're trying to understand how much time falls into a certain department, or you want to know how much is value-added versus non-value-added, this process analysis report is the place to go. You get your process-level data to answer your fundamental questions. You have an activity-by-activity accounting. And so all of the activities that we brought into the map, this is everything we could calculate for those activities, right, for the standard user. And so we've got process level, we have activity level, similar to that summary analysis report. But what we also have now is resource information. So if I'm trying to understand, how many representatives do I need to handle 54 a day, and how much is it going to cost? What's the associated cost for that resource to handle an item in the process? That's what this worksheet is meant to provide. If you incorporate custom properties, right, so you've gone beyond simply defining duration, process time, resources, and you want to understand information like how many touch points are there, right? What's the distance walked, right? How many of, my raw materials are consumed? How many consultations will I have with a subject matter expert? Whatever those additional properties you want to incorporate in the model, we will then summarize that information for you here. So you start to see the quantity and then the cost. And you'll notice there are actually two sets of data here. So as I move away from the summary analysis, I get into my process analysis report, I start to see what we call weighted versus baseline values. So the weighted values are what we tend to focus our attention on because these are those that account for not just how long it takes, but how often we get there. The baseline values are provided more for reference because this is sort of a reflection of what we've entered into the map. So when I get to this step, this is how many I'm going to consume, or this is how long it takes. So we just provide both views. This, again, more for reference. So, these are the values that will contribute to the process statistics. These are really provided here so you can understand what did you type into the model. In addition to these resources and these user properties, you also start to see what we call classifications. So for users who like to use the swim lane diagrams, often there's an interest in understanding, the responsibilities of a certain department, or, maybe you wanted to categorize them as value-added, non-value-added, required. Whatever those categories, those classifications may be, once you have captured those with ProcessView, you can then start to see how much time and cost falls into each one of those groups. And so this is not an exhaustive representation, however, of the ways you can slice and dice data with ProcessView. So you have process-level information. I can look at it on an activity-by-activity basis, be it by resource, right, how much belongs to the operator. I can look at custom properties as well as classifications. In addition to all of that, if I want to drill down and get more detail, ProcessView also lets me break these maps apart. So this is really a network of lots of demand scenarios, right? So when I come into this model, I could start as an email. I have enough information. The issue is logged. We have an immediate solution. It's delivered and it's closed. At the same time, there is a likelihood associated with coming in, having to gather additional information before we can log in the issue and move forward. So lots of paths or demand scenarios. If I want to break this map apart to look at those paths, and ProcessView provides this path button on the toolbar. If I select that option, now I can start to see by path, how long does it take, how much work is involved, what is the cost. And so what ProcessView provides is a list of any path that will occur with a probability of 1% or greater. Not to say we can't open that up and look at more infrequent occurrences, but first pass, we like to focus on those things that occur more frequently. And so with this path list, I can then move selected paths into a new Visio diagram to obtain additional reports. So if, for instance, I had an interest and understanding just what it takes to process an email. Maybe I don't have an interest in the phone calls. I could go through, select everything that began as an email, and then move that into a new Visio file. And then any of those reports that we discussed, the summary analysis report, the process analysis report, and those worksheets we stepped through, now I can begin to generate those to understand what does it take to process an email. Rather than a trouble ticket in general, I can start to look at specific demand scenarios. And this can be very useful, again, not just once you have a valid model, but in validating the model. Many times we are working in the absence of system data, and so we may not have information about how long it takes on average or how much it costs to which we can compare our model. What we do have, however, are subject matter experts that are probably very familiar with those most frequently traveled paths. So if we can break this apart and look at specific scenarios with which we're more familiar, often that gives us another mechanism so we can validate these models, make sure we've got an accurate representation of the current state. Okay, so in addition to this path reporting to Visio, you do also have the ability to push this information to Microsoft Excel. But I find more frequently I like to move it into Visio so I have that visual component, and then I can start generating the analysis report. But all of this effort is so we can get a valid representation of our baseline, our current state, because if we're going to make something better, we have to understand better than what, right? So we draft this current state model, we review our analysis, refine it until we have a valid representation, and then once we've done that, we can very quickly begin to talk about the what-if scenarios, the various future state alternatives. So I have analysis reports that tell me the bulk of the work and the cost that's associated with research. So my continuous improvement experts would want to get together to talk about ways to reduce the work involved, reduce the cost associated with research, or find ways to ensure that it's required less frequently. Right? Additionally, I've got analysis that tells me, I've got a high probability of having to do what is essentially rework, so I may want to investigate ways to reduce that. The bottom line is, once you have that analysis data, it can tell you where to focus your attention to make improvements. And then once you've determined the improvement actions you want to take, you can start to capture that information on the drawing itself. So many people like the fancy kind of sunburst and Kaizen shapes to capture improvement opportunity information, but any shape can be used. And so if I want to describe proposed improvements, I just bring a shape onto the page. I tell ProcessView that this is an improvement opportunity shape, and then it gives me the opportunity to add attributes to this shape. So just as we configured the start shapes and activities, etc., with data fields, we'll want to capture things about the improvement events or actions that are going to be taken. And so again, ProcessView gives you a default list of attributes. So when does it start? When does it finish? Who's responsible? To cover those fundamental elements. And then again, if you want to incorporate custom properties, you can easily do so. But we just drag a few shapes onto the page. We mark them as improvement opportunity shapes. And then ProcessView adds to these some fields where we can capture information about the action that's going to be taken, why we're taking it, etc. And so then once improvement actions have been proposed or identified, the next step is then to design a future state to incorporate those improvements. And because this is a Visio map, now I can simply copy this existing drawing, right? I can insert a new page into my Visio file, paste those drawings, and then all of the data is moved with the shape, right? So you don't have to redefine anything. It's just a matter of tweaking the representation a bit so that you can represent the improvement. So let me see if I can zoom in here a bit so it's not such an eye test. If, for instance, one of our improvements was to implement some standardized form for people to submit these email requests, we may expect that could potentially reduce the amount of time we have to talk to the customer to get additional information. And so maybe we reduce this probability. We'll say we cut it almost in half, drop that down to 35%. And we want to understand, what does that mean in terms of overall performance? Then we can start generating reports, just as we did for the current state, for my new future state map, to start to understand what is the impact of those changes to my probabilities. Or maybe it's a change in demand, right? We're going to see a 10% increase. And we're trying to understand, do I have enough people, right? Whatever those changes are, you represent that future state. You can generate your summary analysis, your past reports, your process analysis reports. What you can also do is ask ProcessView to make comparisons. So once you've described that future state model, there is a compare report that's available. So we just tell ProcessView which file we're working in, and then select the pages that are to be compared. And once we've done that, it will launch a new Excel worksheet, and line by line, it's going to give us a comparison between the process time, the duration, the resource cost. Again, those same fundamental metrics, just a quick comparison so we can understand what is the difference between our baseline, our current state, and this proposed future state. So this is how we can start to understand, is it worth making an investment in new equipment, right? If I can increase the number of workstations to support the demand, is it going to be worth the investment? Or I'm trying to understand, there's a 10% increase in demand, do I need more people? So it's just a matter of, once you've got that baseline together, a copy and paste, and then quickly manipulate the shape data. Or maybe you remove activities, maybe you add new properties, right? Whatever those actions are. What is so powerful about ProcessView is that you can obtain the analysis report so quickly. So there's no harm in that what-if analysis, right? It's very inexpensive to play with a model, maybe more so expensive to experiment in the real world. So this ability to generate a future state and then make some assessments or some analysis decisions about whether or not that future state is attractive enough to make the investment, ProcessView gives us a very nice tool for that. And so there are a number of other reports available to our ProcessView users, other analysis metrics, etc. But for the purposes of this introductory demonstration today, that is everything I wanted to share with you. I'd like to, at this point, ask you if you've been assembling or holding on to questions, if you could submit those.
I have two questions online. One is, can you use probability distributions for arrival rates or processing durations, is the first one.
Well, I'll start with the arrival rates. Because ProcessView was designed to be a static modeling, kind of an easy-to-use tool, we actually made some assumptions in the background regarding those arrivals. You do not have the opportunity to select a distribution to describe your arrivals. We assume that they are Poisson arrivals. We use the exponential distribution. So I'm afraid you just describe the quantity and then whatever that time frame is, and we will assume the Poisson arrival. In terms of the duration, there are really just three options. Either it's a constant value, it's a range of values where we will assume that they are uniformly distributed and we'll calculate an average accordingly. Or you give us this 3-point sort of an estimate where you say most of the time, right, you give us the mode, and then you tell us the minimum and maximum. We have a proprietary, we call it the approximate sampling distribution that we use to calculate the average. It behaves very similar to a normal when the distribution is symmetric. And so those, I'm afraid, are the only three options. So it's either constant, it's described by a uniform, or it's described by our approximate sampling distribution, which, as I said, sort of similar to a normal when things are symmetric. Okay.
Great, thanks, Erica. And then David had a follow-up question about, can probability-weighted statistics be used to determine variances to the baseline and then corrective actions for process improvements?
Well, in terms of providing the variance for ProcessView Pro users. So I've been running kind of our standard reports to keep things sort of light for today. But when you work in the professional analysis mode, we provide a coefficient of variation for the process time, which is just the standard deviation over the mean. So you could, multiply that by our mean process time to get the standard deviation, build intervals if you wanted to. But for the most part, we just report the average. So any building of confidence intervals, things of that nature would be an outboard exercise. People are assembling questions. I should probably also mention you can request, of course, a trial of ProcessView on the website. If you do decide to experiment with the tool, and Terry, it sounds like you're getting a license, probably worth mentioning that within the help, there actually is a quick getting started tutorial. Additionally, upon request, we could likely send some example flow charts or something of that nature if you would find that helpful in getting started. We also have a couple of videos on the website, so if you've not seen those, it's worth a review. They serve as a very nice introduction to the tool.
Perfect. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I think everybody should find ProcessView. It's a very open tool because we are using standard Visio functionality. We've kind of honed in on the analytics side. So, we're using the shape data for organizations to capture information about their process, and then running it through the analytics engine to really understand and hone in on what's going on with the process and where there's possible opportunities for improvement. So with that said, there are no more questions. We're a little bit past our 45 minutes. I want to thank everybody for attending. We are going to have another one of these next month. So I just want to say, hopefully everyone had a great Thanksgiving and get ready for Christmas and the new year. So thanks again for attending this webinar, and we hope to hear from you and see you soon. Bye now.